Hey everybody, it's Mr. Hefner, and I'm coming to you today from an unusual location. Might have something to do with a worldwide pandemic, but we'll never know, will we? Anyway, today we're going to take a look at a poet named T.S. Eliot. Now, T.S. Eliot is a fascinating kind of character. He's somebody who didn't finish his formal Ivy League education, worked an everyday job, struggled with a lot of personal issues, as we'll talk about very soon. And he wrote very erudite poetry. The poetry he writes is something you can study and study and study and find something every time you take a look at it. He became one of the expatriates, which means that he kind of got fed up during the modernist era with kind of lowbrow tastes in America, and he moved off to Europe with others like Hemingway. Unlike the others who eventually came back, T.S. Eliot actually became a British citizen and relinquished his American citizenship. So some people say he doesn't even belong in American literature books, but he was still an American citizen when he wrote what we're going to take a look at today. So, as always, let's get started. Now, the poem we're going to be taking a look at today is probably the second most famous poem by T.S. Eliot. I never saw a ranking, but I would think T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland comes in as probably the most treasured T.S. Eliot poem. This one's a little more accessible. And he wrote this one when he was a young man, kind of thinking about becoming an old man, not unlike Hemingway, I suppose. And it's about someone going through life, always taking the safe route, always figuring there's more time to fix the things that aren't happy, that he's not happy about in life. And the character, the voice in the poem, remember, in a poem, when we have a narrator, we call that the speaker, right? That's our actual literary term for this course, the speaker. Uh, this speaker, narrator, voice in the poem uh, actually has a lot of self-doubts. And today we sometimes describe someone who always takes the safe route in life and is full of self-doubt as a Prufrock. And it comes from the name of the speaker in the poem. So our less than essential question for today is going to be, in what way does this poem, the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, represent Eliot's achievements? So let's take a look at the poem. All right, first of all, if we were together in class today, we would use the reader's journal. And the question here is, have you ever hesitated to tell someone how you felt about him or her? And then explain why you hesitated and what you would have said if you'd been able to speak frankly. And of course, at this point, I'm starting to think this question is way too intrusive of personal issues. So it's more of a think about question here. But sometimes we have feelings for someone and we're not sure we should bring them out. Might be that we like the person, we might feel physically attracted to the person. Sometimes it might be the opposite. Sometimes it might be some advice we think that we could use to help, but we know what they say about giving advice, and sometimes stepping into a situation can hurt us. So that this poem is about that hesitation, that idea that there's this little something inside my head that says I should act right now, but there's something about this that holds me back. And it's a difficult kind of condition for human beings. You go back in your memories to middle school, the whole, will you ask her if she likes me? I can't go myself, but go find out if she likes me, kind of thing. And then my friend talks to your friend who talks to, yeah, you know how that whole thing goes. This is the adult version of all of that to an extent. All right, there's a picture of T.S. Eliot in his white tie formal affair clothing. He could easily go to a Gatsby party dressed like that. We have him born in the 19th century, as many of the, probably all of the authors in this unit were. And he lives all the way up to 1965. So I was, I was 3 years old when T.S. Eliot was buried. And what we're going to take a look at is, here as far as the author, that's what the TS stands for, Thomas Stearns Eliot. I don't think many people know that. We always just call him T.S. Eliot, and that's what he wrote his poems under. So as an author, he's T.S. Eliot. He did go to Harvard, 1910, but as I alluded to at the beginning of this, he had some struggles there. He absolutely excelled when it came to studying languages. And so perhaps that maybe is why his poetry is a little more highbrow than some of the other poetry from this time period. He got an opportunity also to study at Oxford, which is in England. If you remember Gatsby, It is Oxford College where Gatsby says he had an opportunity to study, and therefore he is what they called an Oxford man. But Eliot worked as a bank teller while he was writing poetry, had to bring in the cash. And so he had an everyday kind of job. And he suffered some psychological issues. And he underwent some experimental type treatments that may have made things worse. When I have here, I have intensive psychiatric treatment. Probably the most intensive of this was electric shock therapy. There was this belief that electricity could do an awful lot of things to heal the body. And so people were literally given high amounts of voltage um, with the idea that it could kind of like restart the brain, sort of thing. If you ever want to read a little bit more in the literature version of this, of how, like this electric shock therapy kind of affected people, almost everybody is familiar with the Frank Baum story, The Wizard of Oz. We've seen the movie a million times. But what a lot of people don't know is Frank Baum wrote a whole series of very satirical books set in this magical land of Oz. And there's a follow-up to The Wizard of Oz called Return to Oz, where what basically has happened is, after Dorothy had been in Oz for a while, she keeps talking about this magical place with, everybody in her family, and they start to think she needs to see a doctor. She really believes this stuff. And the doctor they take her to in the city is going to use electric shock therapy on her. And it's a pretty terrifying book, actually. And during the preparation in this dark, scary hospital, while they're getting the electric shock therapy equipment ready, there's an electrical storm brewing, thunder and lightning outside, and something goes wrong. And Dorothy gets transported back to the world of Oz, but now everything's been destroyed. And like I said, it's a very dark and scary story. It was turned into a movie. I think Disney might have made the movie under one of their other brand names, but it terrified the small children that parents took to see it. Anyway, back to T.S. Eliot. So Eliot wrote Prufrock with the encouragement of Ezra Pound, who was one of the early, most influential poets at the start of this modernist period. And you notice, as we've talked about authors and poets throughout this unit, they worked together. They encouraged one another. They were part of these groups that traveled together. And so we really do have probably our clearest literary movement with the modernism movement, because writers aren't just kind of like off by themselves, separated from others. We've brought the world together with things like the telephone and the movie and radio and things like that. And so they're in communicado with one another all the time. And I mentioned at the intro here that The Wasteland is probably his most respected poem. And it's very long. It would take you probably a good half hour to an hour to read all of The Wasteland. If you were reading it like a narrative, to read it as a poem, it's going to take probably days. And I told you he got British citizenship, didn't consider himself an American anymore, thought we had no class over here in this country. And in 1948, he was given the Nobel Prize, not the Pulitzer Prize. The Nobel Prize is an international prize using money that was originally donated from Alfred Nobel, who was the guy who invented TNT. And then he felt that he saw World War I, that his great invention, which was made to help humanity in blasting tunnels and mining and things like that, was weaponized. And so Alfred Nobel set aside the initial money for the Nobel Prize, and now it's funded through donors and interest on that original amount every single year. All right, about this selection, we've talked a lot here. This was published somewhere early in T.S. Eliot's life. So it's a pretty complicated piece, a pretty complex piece. It is what we call a dramatic monologue. So you know what drama is. Drama is like a play. And that log has to do with speech. So oftentimes with a story, we're talking about dialogue, two or more characters speaking together. And here what we've got is a monologue. And monologues are generally internal. On the stage, they have to be external. And sometimes we call that a soliloquy, because on stage, you have to think out loud if you're a character for the benefit of the audience. But when you're reading, you can literally have a character think. And what we're doing in this entire poem is we're with the speaker as he thinks through all of these issues about confidence and society and making changes and sometimes procrastinating things till the next day. In this particular case, there's a woman that he's attracted to, and he's shy and afraid to approach her. Not an uncommon type thing. Another thing that we've got here, you see the boldface down here, this word elliptical. So this is an elliptical poem. And what elliptical means is we only say part of what we want to communicate with the idea that the rest of it is understood. We don't have to say it all for somebody to understand what we're talking about. Give you a quick example here. There's something in grammar called an elliptical phrase or an elliptical clause. And these sometimes cause us to make errors in grammar. So I might say something like, you and I both run, but you're not as fast as me. And that's grammatically incorrect. It's really, you are not as fast as I. Well, that sounds a little funny. Why is it you are not as fast as I? Because it's elliptical and we're leaving part of the sentence out. What we're really saying is, you are not as fast as I am. And we don't add that last part. You would never say you are not as fast as me am. And so when we put the elliptical part in, we see the grammar. But that's grammar, just an example. So elliptical means that it's kind of cycling back, and we don't have to say everything because you know what we're talking about. And then the other bold-faced word that we have here is allusive. And allusive means using a lot of allusions. And we've talked about allusion as a literary term a number of times so far. An allusion is a reference to something the reader already knows. And so in order to use allusions, you need to know the education level and the experience level of your audience. And in this particular case, as I said, T.S. Eliot believes he's writing for the more academically erudite. All right, the literary tools that we have then here, dramatic monologue, which I mentioned. Dramatic monologue is a poem that presents the speech of a single character in a dramatic situation. It's going to be internal here. So we might call it internal monologue. So they're very closely related. And then allusion. We've talked about allusion throughout the entire course. This piece is allusive, which means it uses a lot of allusions. All right, you're going to read the selection, and I want you to, let's put those literary tools to use. Pay particular attention to the allusions throughout this piece. They're going to be allusions to history, biblical stories. They're going to be classical allusions to things like Greek mythology. So just take a look for those as you go. All right, now, this is the point in the presentation, in the video, where you're going to pause it. Just hit pause, open up a new window on your computer, read the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot, and when you're finished, come back here. We'll go over the check for understanding questions together. So I'm going to wait right here while you go read. All right, you're back? You sure you read it? All right, let's go on. All right, here are our questions. We've got some true and falses. And as I've said to you many times throughout this course, I am not a fan of the true and false question in literature because true and false is absolute. And literature should be discussed, right? The meaning is created through the interaction between the reader and the writer. It's not automatically there just because the writer thinks he put it there. All right, but here we go anyway. Number one, the speaker of the poem seems confident and happy with his appearance. And if you just listen to my introduction, you know that's not going to be true. Prufrock is someone who simply lacks confidence. Number two, the speaker believes that there's plenty of time ahead for thinking about and questioning life. And yeah, and that's one of the problems. When people believe that time is limited, time is precious, they act, they do what they need to do now. But when people think that there's always more time, plenty of time, they procrastinate and procrastinate and procrastinate, and they lose important opportunities. And that's the direction that Prufrock is headed in this poem. How about number three? The speaker explains that he has lived his life haphazardly, taking chances without following patterns. No. Prufrock is somebody who always takes the safe route, plans things out, knows where he's going to be, does it tomorrow the way he did it today because it's the way he did it yesterday. It's what he knows, it's what he feels safe with, and so he never takes chances and never experiences anything new. All right, number four, The speaker, I should just call him Prufrock. Prufrock believes that it's difficult for two people to perfectly understand one another. And that's absolutely true. I don't think there's a poet in the world who would say that two human beings can perfectly understand one another. That would be a poet who doesn't understand the human condition. All right, number 5, Prufrock makes an allusion or a reference to Hamlet, the title character from a Shakespearean play. And he does. And you can answer this one true just because you saw the name Hamlet in there and everybody recognizes the name Hamlet. But if you've never read Hamlet or you've never seen a production of Hamlet, I can tell you that Hamlet's downfall is largely, if not completely, brought about by his inability to do the thing that he knows he needs to do. Hamlet is a champion procrastinator. He needs to do something desperate and important, avenging his father's death, but he's afraid to take action because he wants more proof. Okay, I've got some proof, but can I trust that? Maybe I need something else. Maybe I should try this. Maybe I should watch them for a couple weeks. And what happens is the entire situation gets worse and worse, and everybody starts to believe Hamlet is insane. And it's a long debate ever since Shakespeare wrote this play, whether Hamlet is in fact insane, or whether he was just pretending to be insane, or whether he was pretending to be insane and that pretending took over and he became insane. But that's Hamlet. Let's get back to Prufrock here. Okay, a couple multiple choice ones. In this poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, the poet, T.S. Eliot, makes allusions, those references to which of the following? And you could always look back at the text. And again, it doesn't matter that you understand all of these right now if you haven't read them, but the ones that he makes references to here are Michelangelo, who was an artist and a sculptor, Lazarus, and that's a biblical allusion. Lazarus was a character who had been a former friend of Jesus, and in the Bible stories, Jesus raises him from the dead when he finds out that, he had died. And then there's Hamlet, who we just talked about from Shakespeare. Here's another multiple choice. Which of the following best defines this idea of dramatic monologue? We have a poem that presents the speech of a single character in a dramatic situation. Well, that's A, and that's exactly the definition I gave you. So there's no need to go any farther. The correct answer there would be A. All right, so you've got that one. T.S. Eliot uses several lines from Dante's Inferno, another allusion, to introduce the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Now, this one is in here. You would only know this if you read the footnotes as you were doing this from our textbook. We've had a lot of epi words, and they can get confusing, and I'll review them all with you before the end of this course. But epi means above or beyond. So, for example, when we read The Outlaws of Poker Flat, we talked about an epitaph, and that is the writing that goes on your tombstone, and it stands at the head or above the grave. We talked about epilogues, which come after a story. They're sort of the follow-up, little bits of a story where you get an adventure and an adventure and an adventure. Those are episodes. In this particular place, we have something called an epigraph. So an epigraph is when you do writing. That root word graph means writing above. It's writing above the story, something to set the tone. And I could mention it since I covered the others. An epigram is a witty or wise statement. We talked about epigrams when we read Benjamin Franklin, because he was famous for writing epigrams in things like the Almanac, Poor Richard's Almanac. And sometimes epigrams that have been around for a long time and people know them without knowing who said or wrote them, they become proverbs then. All right, so that is The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot. You're getting very close to the end of this course. You're getting close to the end of this unit. And I believe we have just one or two poets to go, and then we'll wrap it all up. If you stayed with me through the entire presentation, I thank you. I hope it helps, and I'll see you online or in class, whichever comes first.